She didn't speak out. She didn't even appear to be upset. "You're toxic," my sister stated, calmly meeting my gaze. "You must go." The room's air froze. Suddenly, my mother was fascinated by the floor. My stepfather remained mute, as if nothing had happened. I got up as a result. I grabbed my bag. I refrained from arguing. I didn't give an explanation. I didn't ask anyone to pick a side. I simply left. After 7 days, my phone continued to ring. Her voice was trembling when I finally responded. Quick, panic. What caused me to receive an eviction notice? She realized then that poisonous people don't typically let you live rent-free forever. Please hit like and leave a remark where you're listening before I explain how we got there. This is especially important if you've ever been the antagonist in someone else's story since you set boundaries. Elizabeth is my name. I'm a 35-year-old dentist. My life appears to be peaceful from the outside. Spotless white jackets, rooms that are quiet, the constant buzz of machinery. I'm frequently told that I seem well organized, grounded, assembled. They fail to notice how much of that serenity was acquired by remaining silent in uncomfortable situations. This wasn't always the case with my family. Everything changed quietly, almost courteously, when my biological father died. Similar to moving furniture in the dark. There was no crash. However, nothing remained unchanged. My mother remarried a few years later. At that point, my stepfather and his daughter, my stepsister, came into our life. We became a blended family on paper. It felt more like a balancing act that never quite reached its core in real life. I discovered early on in life what was expected of me. The competent one, the trustworthy one, the individual with few needs. I was generally the one to handle anything that needed to be done. Not because it was said explicitly, but more because I never voiced my displeasure when it happened. I attended school, developed a career. I covered my own expenses. Being independent wasn't an aim. I started using it by default. My grandmother was the only person who really saw me. She had a tiny apartment in the city, nothing opulent, but warm in the sense that was important. The scent of ancient books. The afternoon light was muted by curtains. "A home should feel like it's waiting for you," she used to remark. That flat came to me after she died. Not as a prize, as an obligation, something she trusted me with. My stepsister was having difficulties at the time. A fresh partnership, erratic income, large-scale schemes with minimal organization. It was offered with care by my mother. Just momentary, until they are able to stand again. In any case, the unit was unoccupied, and family supports family, isn't that right? I replied in the affirmative. It made sense at first. I didn't require the additional funds right now. I was managing daily costs, paying my own mortgage, and keeping up with payments. I believed I was contributing. I had no idea that I was gradually teaching her something quite different. It seemed right to let her stay there without having to pay rent. It was only temporary, I reminded myself. Several months, at most a year. However, months continued to pass. Timelines also ceased to exist. The responses softened every time I mentioned it. Less obvious. There was no longer any certainty. The utilities were paid for. Everything else wasn't. Fixes, upkeep, little problems that in some way fell under my purview. Every time an issue arose, I made the payment. and I suppressed that tiny flicker of uncertainty every time I experienced it. I didn't want to come out as challenging, or self-centered, or the person who caused discomfort. In retrospect, that was consistently the trend. Silently, I gave. They made a comfortable adjustment, and the more commonplace it grew for them, the more incorrect it seemed to me. I simply had no idea how costly that quiet would be. Nothing suddenly blew up. It never does. Things are stretched. They are creepy. They disguise themselves as normal conversations until you discover that you have been standing within something unhealthy for a considerable amount of time. It began modestly. "We might need help with a few things this month," is an example of a text. Nothing specific, no justification. Hours would go by before I understood what she meant. After then, a list would show up. Fixes, fresh furnishings. She thought the flat required a few minor improvements. Words like if and maybe were no longer used by her. Everything was said as if it were obvious. Then the wedding conversation started. It sounded innocuous at first. Thrill, locations, color schemes, concepts. As I cleaned tools in between patients, I paid attention. After a long day of sitting in traffic, I gave a nod. I answered in an impartial manner. Then the figures began to come in, rounded, informal, entered the discussion as if they were weather reports rather than actual expenses. My mother hurried to reassure me whenever I hesitated. She would say, "She's just stressed. You are aware of the nature of weddings." I was reading too much into it, I told myself. That nobody truly anticipated that I would carry this. Up until supper, my mother suggested it would be good to sit together and invited me over. She pledged, no agenda, just family. The table was already arranged for more people than I had anticipated when I entered. Faces I was unfamiliar with. Future in-laws of my stepsister. I ought to have gone back. Rather, I hung up my coat with a smile. Dinner seemed staged. Praise directed specifically at me. Inquiries concerning my work. About my performance. The kind of focus that makes your shoulders tense because you can sense what's about to happen. My stepsister cleared her throat after that. She spoke about more than just the wedding. She discussed the vision, how it ought to seem, how it ought to feel, what it should have been. It was easy to get the numbers, with assurance. Her smile remained weak when she finally turned to face me. I expressed my desire to assist. I stated that I simply couldn't take full responsibility for everything, that I was limited. The space shifted. She laughed because she was brushing me off, not because anything was funny. Across the table, someone remarked on how easy things must be for me. My stepfather also mentioned how much the family had helped me during the years. My mother said nothing, and for some reason, the silence overpowered everything else. I made an effort to explain things gradually. Take caution. I chose my words in the same manner that you do when you're still trying to be understood. My stepsister then folded her arms, sat back in her chair, and uttered those words. "You're being poisonous." The word didn't seem natural. It sounded ready, as if it had been waiting for the ideal opportunity. To put an end to a conversation, not to start one. I surveyed the table. Nobody gave her a correction. Nobody resisted. Nobody even appeared uncomfortable, and something became brutally apparent in that quiet. Money was never a factor in this. It has to do with control, and I had had enough of acting as though I was blind. That night, I didn't sleep because everything suddenly made sense, not because I was upset. The night continued to play over and over in my head. The grins, the meticulous arrangement, the way the discussion had been led. After I was identified as the issue, there was silence. I kept hearing that one word, as if it had completely changed the part they had given me. I went through my routine automatically the following morning. Take a shower, coffee, keys. Something had changed beneath my mirror, but it still appeared the same. I was no longer in pain. I was unambiguous. Nobody got in touch for days. No follow-up. No justification. No effort to make amends. Just quiet. The kind that arises when folks think you'll return by yourself, because they think you'll change your mind and agree once more. Rather, I listened. I started writing everything down in my notepad. Payments, bills, fixes, tiny sums that had gradually accumulated in silence. I wasn't going downhill. I wasn't planning anything. For the first time, I was being really honest with myself about how long this had been going on, and how giving without being asked had become second nature, and how inaccurate that was. I had a meeting with a lawyer a few days later. I had known them informally for many years. Be calm, steady, don't be dramatic. Sunlight streamed across the edge of his desk as we sat in a calm downtown office. I gave a clear explanation of everything. The apartment, the absence of any agreement, the meal, the word that put a stop to everything. He didn't interrupt while he listened. He then gave a nod. His words were straightforward. By taking back what was rightfully mine, I wasn't breaking any laws. Steps were present, notices, schedules, nothing severe, not really dramatic, just boundaries written down. That term once more, limits. After driving home, I sat in my car for a while before entering to allow the silence to settle, because I was aware that things would never return to their previous state once I moved on. My hands felt chilly on the steering wheel. My granny sprang to mind, about how she had put her trust in me for that place, regarding something she used to say frequently: you should never have to compromise your dignity in order to be polite. I didn't give anyone a call that evening. I didn't send any mails. I didn't give an explanation. I kept what I was going to do a secret. I carried out the procedure precisely as instructed. Silently, take caution. It was a formal notice. Indifferent, there is absolutely no emotion in it. It seemed strangely normal when I deposited it in the mailbox next to my building. Similar to sending a bill, like completing a task that had been ongoing for some time. I didn't experience pride. I was not relieved. I felt stable. I also had a sneaking suspicion that the silence would end. The first call arrived 3 days later. As the city whispered outside my window, I was at home reheating leftovers with my shoes kicked off at the door. On the counter, my phone buzzed. The screen glowed with her name. I didn't respond. Once more, it buzzed. And once more. Missed calls were piled on top of one another by the time I picked it up, as if she had been dialing constantly out of fear that everything would fall apart if she stopped. She didn't say hi when I finally responded. What caused me to receive an eviction notice? Her tone had shifted. No advantage. No assurance. Panic, slender and vulnerable. In the background, I could hear someone else asking questions and speaking rapidly. Most likely my mother. My stepfather, perhaps. I was no longer invisible all of a sudden. The silence stretched as I leaned on the kitchen counter. She went on, her words stumbling over one another, You can't be serious. This must be an error. You'll settle down, Mum said. You were just emotional, she remarked. Sentimental. The word lingered there. I remained silent. I wasn't reacting for the first time. I was answering that term once more. One more attempt to make me smaller. There isn't a mistake, I stated calmly. Even to myself, my voice sounded steady. You were informed that the agreement was only temporary. It's finished. Her breathing shifted. Quicker now. She yelled, You didn't even warn us. I nearly burst out laughing. You just did this behind our backs. Nearly. The dinner table crossed my mind. The way they had waited and observed me. The manner in which choices had been made without ever consulting me. I said, I didn't do it behind your back. I did it without arguing. Shouting never had the same impact as that. After that, the calls continued. Waves of messages arrived. Anger replaced confusion. Bargaining replaced anger. Timelines were provided by her. Pledges, explanations that came too late. My mother then called, speaking in a tight, forced-come tone. She declared, This is getting out of control. We are related. We may discuss this further. I posed one query to her. Did I attend that dinner with family? She remained silent. I learned everything from that quiet. They arrived at my door 2 days later. Before I opened it, I peered through the peephole. With my mouth set and arms folded, my stepsister took the closest position. With her eyes already moist, my mother hovered just behind her. My stepfather seemed to wish he might vanish as he gazed past them both. They weren't invited inside. First to speak was my stepsister. She said, You embarrassed us. Do you know how this looks? I looked at her face, the one I had spent years defending. And all of a sudden, I could see it plainly. This was not a dread of losing a house. Fear of losing access was the reason. I muttered, You told me to get out. I did, then. I didn't mean that, she yelled. I was angry. You felt at ease, I answered. There's a distinction. My mother moved to the front. She didn't intend it that way, honey. You are aware of her personality. I nodded. We all say things we regret, and the consequences of our words affect us all. My dad cleared his throat. He said, Let's be realistic. The flat is not necessary for you. You're doing well. Why make things more difficult than they need to be? Because it finally uttered the quiet portion out, that line landed heavier than the others. I felt something inside of me totally settle as I gazed at him. I said, This isn't about need. It has to do with ownership and deference. My stepsister scoffed. So what? Are you now punishing us? I gave a headshake. No, I'm choosing to opt out. She seemed to be looking for the appropriate lever to pull as she gazed at me. Her voice then became sharper once more. You're being poisonous. It was there. She had been clutching the word like a weapon. I didn't recoil. Toxic people don't let sisters live rent-free in their apartments, I said softly. There was no anger in the remarks. They were final. Nobody said anything for a while. My mother parted her lips, then shut them. My stepfather glanced at his shoes. When reality finally dawned, my stepsister's face reddened and then drained. Weakly, she murmured, You can't just throw us out. Where should we go? I looked her in the eye. You ought to have asked that question before concluding that I wasn't worthy of basic respect. After that, she lost all confidence. She made an effort to apologize, then assigning blame. then expressing regret once more. She seemed to be going through scripts in the hopes that one would still work, as each version sounded practiced. Not one of them did. I said, "I'll give you the time specified in the notice. Just nothing more. Nothing less." My mother grabbed my arm. I took a step back. I continued, "This isn't cruelty. There is a boundary here." Soon after, they departed. Don't yell. Not a scene. Simply silent, the kind that occurs when someone realizes they've gone too far and there's no turning back. The ensuing weeks were fairly quiet. Not a single call. Nothing to say. Just room. I didn't enter the apartment on the last day. I remained on the other side of the street. As I watched them load the crates, I sat in my car. My stepsister entirely stayed out of my way. My mother moved slowly, as if the burden of everything had finally gotten to her. My stepsister came over and put the keys on my car's hood once they were done. For a little period, her hand lingered, as if she had more to say. She didn't. Without turning around, they drove off. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt liberated. After they were gone, the apartment was silent. It's the kind of silence that settles rather than reverberates. I slowly made my way through the rooms, taking note of everything I had previously overlooked. Scratches on the walls. A cabinet hinge that is loose. There is no longer any sentimental connection to regular clothing. I made the necessary corrections. Minor fixes. Brand new paint. Not really dramatic. New occupants moved in a few weeks later. Dependable, courteous, simple and predictable. The rent was paid on schedule. The place felt the way my grandmother had envisioned it for the first time. Steady, not tense. No one from my family contacted me again. I'm not sorry. No demands. The stillness felt lighter this time, as if I had finally let go of something I had been carrying for years without recognizing how heavy it was. I concentrated on my personal life. It was easy to work. The evenings seemed to go on forever. I began refusing without mentally practicing justifications. That in and of itself altered everything. That day, I didn't lose my family. I no longer believed that self-erasure is necessary for love, and getting rid of that delusion offered me something I didn't have before. Tranquility. I carried the word toxic like a scar for a very long time. I kept thinking about that supper and wondering if I had been too strict. It's too cold. I'm not willing to give up another part of me. Families have a way of teaching you that your level of love is determined by how much you are ready to give up. However, this is what I ultimately discovered. People who live on entitlement will call you terms that sound like moral judgments. When you cease to be useful, poisonous, self-centered, callous, these are not diagnoses. They are demonstrations. They occur when limits take the place of convenience and access is eliminated. I didn't ruin my family. I left a role that was subtly ruining me. Now life is more peaceful, honest, not empty. I invest time, money, and energy in things that benefit me rather than deplete me. And the tranquility that results from that is more valuable than any validation I previously sought. You're not the only one who finds this narrative disturbingly similar. Tell us where you're listening and what barrier made a difference in your life. Someone else might feel more seen as a result. Make sure to subscribe if you want to read more authentic tales about choosing self-respect, silent power, and familial betrayal.